Hello everyone and welcome back to another travel video. Today I am going to be going over my fantastic and wild adventure in Greenland. I'm currently recording this on the 3rd of September. I came back on the 1st, it's 2 days ago, so it's fresh in my mind, ready to talk about. This may take a couple recording sessions, so if I randomly change shirts midway through the video, you know why. So, in order to get to Greenland, it's more complicated than usual. If you live in Denmark or Iceland, then it's nice and easy, but if you live in any other country, then it's a bit awkward. So basically, what I had to do is take a flight from Bristol all the way to Copenhagen to start off with, and then get a flight from Copenhagen all the way up to Greenland. Before we even got on the plane, we had a few issues. Our plane was pretty early in the morning, so I think it must have been about 20 past 10, so we set off from home about 7, but we soon found ourselves panicking that we might not even make the flight because we encountered some of the worst traffic that I've ever seen. We were at a standstill in traffic for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that, and then miraculously the whole thing cleared up and we got to the airport on time, ready for our flight, and yeah. To think that we were panicking that we wouldn't even get to the plane. What a different video this would have been if we didn't make it. So yeah, we arrived in Copenhagen. We were going to be staying a night in Copenhagen, so we had time to explore the city a little bit. So we stayed right next to the airport in Scandic CPH Strandpark. If I pronounce anything wrong in this video, horribly wrong, then correct me. Especially when we get to the Greenlandic stuff. But yeah, while we were in Copenhagen, we took the metro into the centre and we had a walk down the Nihab. This is probably the thing that Copenhagen is most famous for. It certainly lives up to the hype. It's such a nice walk down there. The weather unfortunately wasn't really in our favour that day, but it was still a lovely walk. And along the way down there was this boat full of choir members and they were all singing. It was all in Danish, didn't understand a thing, but they were singing and everyone was recording it around it, so it was pretty cool. We also explored Rosenborg Slot, which was quite nice. It was not really the biggest castle ever, but it was interesting. But once we were done in Copenhagen, we had a early morning to catch our plane all the way to Greenland. And the plane was something at 9 in the morning. Don't know what it was, but in the airport, I started to feel quite unwell and I needed the toilet. I hope you guys are not eating while watching this. I had diarrhea and it was awful. It was the worst diarrhea I've had since I was young. I don't know whether I had some sort of food poisoning or whatever from the night before, I have no idea. The worst thing is that I needed the toilet in the airport when there was only an hour to go until the plane took off, and I was panicking, and you'll never guess what, they were cleaning the toilets, and so I couldn't go. They literally boarded it off while they were cleaning it. It was the worst possible time. There were no other toilets nearby. I must have waited something like 10-15 minutes for them to finish cleaning. And then they finally finished and I was able to go. We got on the plane and I was needing the toilet again. So I actually had to ask one of the, what do you call them, the air hostess or whatever you call them, I don't know. I had to ask them if it was okay if I went to the toilet before takeoff, and thankfully they said yes. For the first part of the flight, I still felt unwell even after I had gone. Then I had to go again, and then after that, I was okay. So we flew all the way from Copenhagen up to Greenland, and it was this place here called Kangerlussuaq. We tried so many times to pronounce it correctly, and we just completely failed. It was about 4 hours and something minutes, and when we got there, it was just like we had landed on a different planet. There were no trees anywhere. We're going to move on to Kangerlussuaq later, but for now we took a connecting flight from Kangerlussuaq all the way over to Sisimiut. This distance that you see here, this might not seem very much, but this took 25 minutes. And I know that's still very short for a plane flight. For me, would even be 15 minutes in my mind, or 10-15 minutes. But no, it was 25 minutes to cover this amount of distance. If that didn't show you how big this island is, then I don't know what will. This is the biggest island in the world, and most of it is a gigantic ice cap. It's the biggest permanent ice cap outside of Antarctica. But yeah, we arrived at the airport in Sisimiut. We were on this tiny plane. It had like propellers and everything. Naked propellers, if that makes sense. There wasn't like a casing around them like there are on normal planes. But yeah, it lands on this tiny runway that no normal plane lands on. And this was the smallest airport I have ever seen. The check-in room, the waiting room, and the gate are all the same room. From what I'm used to, this was just alien. I caught some cool videos of the plane landing. Wait, look at this. Oh yeah, So we got picked up by the people who owned the hotel at the airport. We drove over, and it was this place here, Hotel Sisimiut. Sisimiut is probably one of the easiest places to pronounce in the whole of Greenland. It was hard to get used to the fact that we were this far north. We were in Greenland. It was a pretty quiet town, as you would expect with something this far north, but this was probably the warmest place that we visited during our time here. But I don't know if that was just in part due to the weather. The cold wasn't too bad. We had prepared a lot with clothing, warm clothing. It does get cold, even in summer. It is very cold, like for normal Europeans. During our whole stay in Greenland as a whole, the temperature did not go above 10 degrees, at least I don't remember it ever doing so. And you know, there are no roads connecting the towns of Greenland. The only way to get around is either by flying or taking a boat. And so we took the easier option, which was flying. There are roads, but they don't extend outside the towns. Sisimiut, unsurprisingly, it's a fishing town. Our first evening meal in Sisimiut, in this restaurant here, was spectacular. The restaurant in this hotel was particularly good, but it was expensive. And that's the thing about Greenland. It's a territory of Denmark, so you kind of expect it to be expensive. In this restaurant, I had halibut fish with, so there's probably a picture of it on screen, but it had battered cauliflower, it had pickled fennel topped with pea shoots, and the sauce was like a cauliflower foam sauce, and it had dill oil dressed on it as well, and also hazelnuts. I did not know what to expect from this at all, but it ended up being one of my favorite meals that I've ever had. I was massively impressed. The dessert was fabulous as well. I had like a strawberry mousse and sorbet, I think, with like almond and strawberry and chocolate bits decorated on top. It was nice. I don't think it was as nice as the main course though. When we finished our meal, we took a little break because it was raining for a while, and then we decided, you know what, let's go on a little bit of a walk, and we walked down here towards the waterfront. These mountains here had clouds rolling over them, and it was really cool. It immediately came to me that this is not really the Greenland that people think of, because there was no snow around this area. There was no snow. You can see snow on these pictures, but when we were there was none of it. So the next morning we had booked this Inuit hike. We initially met at this place, Hotel Sisimiut. Our tour guide was called Rasmus. He was Danish. He had actually been raised in Greenland, and basically he took us on a walking tour from here down through these grassy bits onto this island. It just says island here, but he told us that this was called Tele Island because it has radio masts and telecommunications stuff, which kind of ruined the scenery, I'm not gonna lie, but they need to put it somewhere. We learned a lot about Inuit culture, Inuit history. There are a few graves up here, Inuit graves up here. One of them, you could still see bones underneath it. It was actually kind of creepy. You could see like a frontal lobe, you could see like a femur, thigh bone. Goodness knows how old that grave was. I think he did say how old it was, but I can't remember. These grassy areas had something called turf houses. Basically, turf houses were sort of houses made of mud and stuff like that. They were actually very well insulated. Nowadays, they are just covered in grass, heavily covered in grass. I think that's the case because people living in these turf houses would have excreted a lot of very good fertilizer for the soil. That's why there is so much more grass on the turf houses than everywhere else around it. But these lines that you can see going across the landscape, they are actually cables. They are steel cables connecting the telecommunications stuff to the rest of the town. We had to avoid stepping on them too hard. It was some lovely scenery. The weather was perfect on this day as well, pretty much beautifully clear sky. We found some more old houses. I think you can see some of them here. These are a bit more well preserved. He went through several eras of Inuit culture that I don't remember. What I do remember is the Sakak. They were the first inhabitants of Greenland, I think. But they died out like something around 800 BC. There was a rise in temperature on Earth of about 1.5 degrees, or was it a drop in temperature? But whatever happened made it completely unsuitable to live there, and so they all died out. There are some other Inuit time frames that he went through, but I don't remember them all, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, it was very fascinating, and even though it was just this little patch of land, it doesn't look that interesting from above, but in the sunlight it did really look pretty cool, and these mountains over here looked even cooler. So after that we got dropped off back at the Hotel Sisimiut, and we decided not to go straight back to the hotel. Instead we decided to do is have a walk around town and see what we can find. So we walked the other way, we walked eastward, and around about here there were tons and tons and tons of Greenlandic dogs. Greenlandic dogs are used for hunting for locals. They're used for dog sleds that you see being used in snowy places, and they are so noisy. There weren't that many here compared to what we saw in Ilulissat. We'll get onto that later. They're adorable things, even though they're relatively big dogs. When they're sleeping, they look cute. We went this way originally because I had found this lake. I hadn't found it, but I saw it on the map. I thought, oh, there's probably some way we can walk there. And we walked up here. We had a fantastic view of the lake. Now, what this lake's name is, I have no idea, but nevertheless it was a stunning area, and just looking this way, it just felt like you were looking off into like the out of bounds area of like a video game map. Like Sisimiut is the main map, and like the mountains over here are like the out of bounds area that you're not allowed to go past. It really felt like that, and it was kind of cool. It was wild to think how far we were actually from the ice cap, because when you look at Greenland from space, you think, oh, that's not that far from the ice cap. No, it really is. Something I nearly forgot to mention just now, something really interesting we found there was, you're seeing a picture on screen, we saw this jawbone lying on the ground. It was properly real as well. That is a real bone. The question is, what animal does it come from? If anyone has any ideas, let me know in the comments. It might be some kind of wolf or fox or something, but I would have thought the front tooth would be bigger. So maybe it's some sort of young creature? I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you have an idea of what that jawbone could be. We didn't do too much for the rest of the day. We had a meal in the cafe, this time in the hotel. Yes, there is a restaurant and a cafe. Also, another thing I've forgotten to mention is the bugs. There are a lot of insects around. They got better towards the end of the holiday, but in the early parts of the holiday, the insects were annoying. The next day, we were staying near this Sisimiut museum, which is actually not one building, it's multiple buildings. The weather wasn't really again in our favour, but there were some interesting buildings. This building right here is the first church ever built in Greenland, because you know, Inuits are not Christian, are they? So this whalebone arch I thought was pretty interesting. You might just be able to see it here. I'll go into street view so you can see it properly. The whalebone arch name is not a lie. This is a real whale jaw. and actually it goes a further 2 meters under the ground. Me standing underneath it, I was about here. I don't know what whale it came from. It did say in the museum, but that same day we had to go to our next location. Our flight was about just before 2 p.m, so we had enough time to do this Sisimiut museum in the morning. The shuttle bus took us back to the airport and we were flying back to Kangerlussuaq, but this time we were staying. So back we go to Kangerlussuaq, the main airport hub of Greenland. You may be asking, how on earth is a tiny town like this the main airport hub of Greenland? This is a much smaller town than Sisimiut. So basically, I think at the end of the Second World War, the US established this as a military base. The reason for that was because the region that Kangerlussuaq is in has very stable weather. There's barely any wind there, so it doesn't disrupt planes landing there. It's not used as a military base anymore, although I think there are still some planes there, not for military use, but for expedition use. If there are scientists going out onto the ice cap, for example, they might take one of those planes to help them go out there. So we were staying here at the Polar Lodge. It's this long building here, and it was almost a sort of like hostel of sorts, but it wasn't a hostel because you had your own room and you weren't sharing with anyone else, but you did share a bathroom, and we all shared the same kitchen, all shared the same dining room and stuff. I thought it was quite cool. I thought it opened the door for me to start using youth hostels for traveling. Youth hostels are so much cheaper than like hotels and such. I don't think that hosteling is a bad idea for me in the future. So when we arrived in Kangerlussuaq, the first afternoon we spent there, we went on this sort of Arctic safari tour sort of thing. We were picked up at the airport and he took us on this long drive up here on like a proper 4x4, because this is a dirt road, by the way. Everything past this bridge is a dirt road. We went up here in these mountainous regions and the scenery there was pretty damn cool. It would have been better though if it wasn't so damn foggy. It was very foggy and a bit of rain there too. The main objective was to see Arctic wildlife. Unfortunately, we didn't see much. What we did see though, we saw a reindeer around about here when we were viewing from here, and we also saw an Arctic hare. I think it was here. It was hiding behind a bush, very relaxed. It wasn't in a rush or anything. We didn't get a proper look at it, but yeah, we saw an Arctic hare, which was nice. I wanted to see some muskox. There were so many rocks around that looked exactly like muskoxes. But yeah, it was cool regardless, despite the poor weather and the poor conditions. Our tour guide must have been something like my age. He was so young. Early 20s or mid 20s he looked. So I can't remember his name, unfortunately. So this river flowing through Kangerlussuaq comes from the glacier. It's glacial meltwater, and it runs into this beautifully long fjord, of which Kangerlussuaq gets its name from. I believe it means something like long fjord or something in Greenlandic. So the next day, I thought this was going to be one of the best days, because we had booked a tour of the Russell Glacier. So we got picked up at our lodge by a man named Karsten. That was our tour guide for this. I have a picture of him. He drove us in this big bus along these dirt roads here over to the Russell Glacier. The views along the way were incredible. These lakes here, they were like perfect mirror reflections. It was a bit bumpy in places. He said it was going to get much worse towards the end of the trek, but it didn't get that much worse, to be quite honest with you. But the views were phenomenal. We got to about here and we started to see our first glimpses of the ice cap, and along the way along here, this is a crashed plane from 1968, and you can see it here. I also have pictures from my phone. Don't worry, all 3 people on board survived. They ejected out of their seats and they landed safely, but apparently it was just very poor weather that day. The visibility was pretty much nothing. The plane was just circling a lot, waiting for the conditions to clear, and it just ran out of fuel. But then we went further along the dirt road and we eventually got to our parking spot, which was about here, I think, and we started our hike towards the Russell Glacier. And this was actually not easy at all, going from here up here, and then there was actually quite a steep descent down here and into here. We walked all the way, I think it was around out here, but it was the most extraordinary sight. This gigantic 70-meter tall wall of ice just completely surround you. Every now and again you would just hear this tremendous cracking sound. Sadly, we did not see any glacial carvings, any big pieces falling off. There was also a little waterfall, I think, around about here. But yeah, incredible scenery. We saw little bits falling off the ice, but not anything massive. Would have been incredible if we saw something fall off. The hike actually back to the bus was probably harder than the way there, because we had to go back up this steep part. If you ever find yourself going to Greenland, you will likely be landing at Kangerlussuaq. When you're here, take a night or two here and just take a tour to the Russell Glacier. It's so worth it, trust me. A lot of people just travel through Kangerlussuaq and don't give it any attention, but there is a lot of beauty around here and it's unfortunate to be missing it out. The weather there as well while we were there was just perfetto. I don't know what perfect is in Greenlandic, but this was probably the warmest day of the whole trip. So in the evening we had booked a meal at the restaurant A.e.r.o, which is a restaurant on the shore of Lake Ferguson, which is this rather large lake here, and it's a spectacular lake. It reminds me of the lochs in the Scottish Highlands. The view is spectacular, but beware of the prices. They are actually very scary. Prices at this restaurant are staggeringly high. I tried a muskox meal, which had potatoes and carrots and other things alongside, and that was 355 krona, which is around about £40, which is similar in euros. I don't know what that is in dollars. I'll put it on screen. And the final price that we paid for everything that we ordered was 1,519 krona. Like, holy bollocks. I just could not believe that we would ever spend that much on a meal. If you really want a restaurant with nice views, then you might as well go here. But if you want to save money, don't go here. That is the most expensive restaurant I've ever been to and probably ever will go to. So after we finished in the restaurant, we headed back to the lodge to say our final night there, and the next day we took our flight to Ilulissat. We flew up way north up here, and when we landed here, this is officially the furthest north point I've ever stood on land. There you go, at the bottom here it says 69.24 degrees latitude. The plane ride there was very cool. I was sat on the right hand side of the plane and we were going over the Icefjord here. This was the main purpose of us going to Ilulissat, is this gigantic ice fjord here that shoots icebergs pretty much out into Disco Bay. But I was sat on the right hand side and I could see the density of the icebergs was so much higher than I ever expected. Really unexpected for me because we had booked a boat tour of the icebergs and I was like, how are we gonna fit a boat through all this? But the answer was we weren't. When we arrived at the airport, we supposedly had a shuttle bus booked back to the hotel. We said the time we were arriving. We arrived early as well. We didn't see them straight as we got outside, but so we decided to wait, but we waited and we waited and we waited and nothing came, and so we had to go back into the airport to ask one of the people in the shops to actually call them for a shuttle bus. We booked it and everything, and they just didn't bother turning up. And then finally, after about 10-15 minutes, they showed up. It just seemed very unorganized. But yeah, so eventually the shuttle bus took us, and it was here, Hotel Nuka. This image, as you can see at the bottom here, was taken in 2009. At this point, the hotel that we stayed in didn't exist. So the imagery doesn't show the hotel here, but if I show you here, it does exist. So this was 2023, this photo was taken. It was the first place that we stayed in that used electronic locks rather than the proper keys and stuff. It was the most modern place we'd stayed in. Whoa! The actual town of Ilulissat supposedly is smaller than Sisimiut, according to population figures. But it really didn't feel like that at all. It felt like Ilulissat was much more lively, a lot more people there than Sisimiut. Sisimiut felt very quiet. I don't know if that's just because it's a more popular place to visit than Sisimiut. So after we had checked in, we decided we would walk up to the ice fjord over here. Along the way here, we found an enormous area of Greenlandic dogs. This whole area here was littered with them. There were so many! The Icefjordcenter is around right here, and like I said, this image is from 2009, so it actually doesn't show the Icefjordcenter because it's not built yet. But past the Icefjordcenter, there's this trail that goes down straight towards the ice fjord. This is when we first properly saw the icebergs. We saw some massive ones, huge icebergs. When we were standing here, there were just some incredible views of just the ice going out here and then the ice extending way back towards the glacier, because that's what it is. It's coming from a glacier. It's one of the most active glaciers in the world. That's why there's so many icebergs here. Whoa! The view that we had, it really hit me hard, because it's just, all this is somewhat due to climate change, right? At least partly. Yes, this may be one of the most active glaciers in the world, but it's going to be more active than usual because of climate change. And you know, it takes icebergs a couple of years to get through here. So it takes most of them, on average, about 2 years to get completely through the ice fjord and then out to sea. And the size of some of them were just unbelievable. Some of them must have been, what, about 100 meters tall. That's huge. That's enormous. So we had decided that evening to take a boat tour of the ice fjord and some icebergs around it from 8:30 until 10:30. So it was a very sort of late night thing. The sun catches on the icebergs and it creates a great scene, but it wasn't looking very promising. The weather was calm and all, but it was very cloudy, so it wasn't looking like we were going to get a good sunset. But we went off anyway. We had our dinner, and then it was around about here we set off. Yeah, it was something like there. It looks a lot different on the modern picture, doesn't it? We got picked up by our boat there, and we were told that there was actually one more that was on with us, and we didn't know where they were. The tour guide, he rang the guy that was supposed to be on with us, and he'd actually gotten on the wrong boat. He was already out in the ice fjord. What we were gonna do is actually collect him from the boat. It was actually quite a task. We found the boat he was on, and he just simply hopped across with all of his stuff. He was an Italian photographer, and it turns out a photographer was the thing that we didn't know we needed, but also something we completely didn't expect, and what we got was the sun, of course, sets in the west, and so actually over this way towards this island, which is called Disco Island, there was a gap between the clouds and the horizon that the sun could peek through. As the sun lowered and lowered and lowered, it got brighter and brighter and brighter, and eventually the sun was perfectly lighting up the icebergs. It was absolutely stunning, and it really made the shapes of these icebergs a lot more interesting, because you could see they were reflecting, and you could see where the ice was actually melting and the shiny sides. And in some places there were even mini waterfalls coming off the icebergs. There were little rivers coming down from the top of the icebergs. Just falling like a waterfall. The photographer, Nicolas or something, I think his name was, he was sort of like telling the driver where to go. And normally it's the driver deciding where to go, right? But this photographer was like, no, let's go here, let's go here, let's go here. But it actually wasn't annoying. He knew the best places to get good photos from. And wherever we went, there was just a spectacular picture waiting to be taken. I'm going to share with you guys something. I'm a bit scared of going on boats, especially out at sea. If it's on like a lake or something, I'll be fine. But if it's out in the ocean, I will start to get nervous because the waves, I don't like the waves. You know, what we did was the Italian photographer told the driver to go around about there was this iceberg, and the Italian photographer saw that there were 2 sailboats next to this iceberg, and he was like, oh yeah, let's go to where the sailboats are because they always have the best view. And lo and behold, he was absolutely right. We went up to this iceberg and it was possibly the biggest iceberg of all of them, and this was about 6 kilometers offshore. The town was so distant, you could barely see the town. The conditions were perfect, the water was calm, the sun was perfectly hitting the iceberg, the red sailboats made a perfect photo opportunity. We did a whole circuit around this iceberg. It was scary how big this iceberg was. It was unbelievable. This may be the greatest view I've ever had in my life. This may be the greatest thing I've ever seen. The way the sun was reflecting off it was just magical, and the sailboats next to it. Oh, that is a view I will never forget. It was bitterly cold, but thankfully where we sat was actually like inside the boat. It was nice and warm in there. Where we sat outside was bitterly cold, and you can expect that from being on a boat in open water near icebergs, but the cold didn't do anything to ruin the view or anything. That was the greatest thing I've ever seen. Then we went back towards the main icebergs. We got a few more pics of the setting sun with the icebergs before the sun then dipped below the horizon. Oh my god, that is something that I will never forget, and it's something that I think all of you should experience at least once in your life. Go to the Ilulissat Icefjord and do a boat tour of it. It's the most unbelievable thing. If you can, try and book a small boat, because if you go on a big boat with lots of people, you can't go as close to the icebergs because there is risk going out on a boat with icebergs because they can tip, bits can fall off them, enormous pieces can fall off them, dangerous things can happen. So I think a small boat is recommended for this because a smaller boat can escape more easily if something happens. Glad to get off the boat because even though the views are incredible and stuff, I wanted to get off the boat so badly because I don't like being on boats in open water. We were very lucky there was no rough seas or anything. The water was very nice and calm. But yeah, after that we went back to the hotel and we were exhausted. The next day we decided that we would go to the Icefjordcenter because we just walked past it the day before, and so we actually went in this time. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. The most interesting thing to me, I think, was they had ice core samples from deeper and deeper and deeper into the ice cap. They had, I think, 5 or 6 different ice core samples. All of them were like sort of represented different time frames, and they go back as far as hundreds of thousands of years ago, and it's really cool. They have like microscopes and stuff, and you see like there's lines in the ice where big events have happened in history, like volcanic eruptions. After we were done with the ice fjord, we decided to go on a different trail this time. Instead of going down here, we decided to go up this rocky area. It had various views of the icebergs around. It was quite a long walk, but we eventually made it all the way around. There were like 10 million viewpoints too. Like, there were so many different ways to see the icebergs. It's not like you see different icebergs day after day. The ice fjord does not move very quickly. When you go and see it once, and then you come back and see the next day, it'll look pretty much the same. And when we got back to town, we heard the sounds of Greenlandic dogs. That evening, we decided that we would get a meal from Cafe Nuka, which is literally just across the road from the hotel. In fact, this is where you get breakfast from. But we had an evening meal there instead this time, and I had fish and chips, but in Greenland, not Britain. It was pretty good, nothing immensely special. The fish was definitely better than the chips. Now the next day happened, and the next day was horrific weather. We were thinking of booking a whale watching tour. We didn't actually book it because we were told by people that it probably wasn't worth it because there's not a good chance of seeing whales. Regardless, after the ice fjord tour, I was like, no, I do not want to do whale watching. I've been on a boat enough. But I don't think we would have gone anyway because the weather was way worse on this day. The wind was much stronger, it was raining, the waves were pounding against the sea. It was not nice, and it turned to sleet, and then eventually later on it turned to snow. But before that, we went to the Ilulissat museum. It was very similar to the Sisimiut museum. Very, very similar. It was alright, and not anything that I remember specifically. We thanked our lucky stars that we didn't go out for whale watching because I think I would have probably been seasick. Later on in the night, the sleet turned to snow. We had to go to bed real early because our flight was at 8:15 in the morning. I woke up at 5:30. And I found that there was an inch-thick layer of snow, or maybe even 2 inches. And the whole landscape was transformed. The whole landscape changed completely. It wasn't snowing, but there was a layer of snow everywhere. We made it to the airport and we flew back to Kangerlussuaq, where it had also been snowing. And then it was time to get on the big plane, the big plane back to Copenhagen. But there was actually a technical issue with the plane, which prevented us from taking off for a very long time. We were sat waiting for ages and ages and ages, because during the safety demonstration, the power randomly cut out. They got it back on, and then it cut again, and then it got back on, and then I think it cut again, and then they got it back on, and it didn't do it again, and then they said they had fixed it, and then even more of a delay. We had to go in here and get the wings cleaned because it was still snowing, and then after that we finally took off back to Copenhagen, and all that didn't really help my nerves on the way back because the pilot did say that there was turbulence along the way, and I don't like turbulence. I think it's very uncomfortable, but I did find a way of making myself less anxious during turbulence, and that is just literally trying to go to sleep. I flew back to Copenhagen, everything was fine, and it was very weird because I hadn't seen true pitch black darkness in Greenland because we're so far north. Even when the sun sets, you can still see it for quite a long time. You can still see the glow out for quite a long time after it sets, but this in Copenhagen was the first time in a while that it was completely pitch black. And then we stayed in a youth hostel, or pretty much it's a youth hostel. There's this next house to Copenhagen. The rooms in this place were very interesting indeed. There were 4 beds, and it was this very tightly squeezed room. 2 beds on the ground, 2 beds on top either side of this tiny little passageway where you walk through to the window, and then the bathroom was on the left before the beds. It was so interesting. I had never seen anything remotely similar to that. The next day we woke up and we didn't really know what to do. We were exhausted and we really didn't know what we should do. Tivoli was right here, but we figured that would probably be too expensive. So we decided that we would go over to this place, which is Tycho Brahe's Planetarium. And you know me, I love space. So we went to Tycho Brahe's Planetarium that I actually didn't know was Danish. I'd heard of Tycho Brahe, but I didn't know he was Danish. Most of it was in Danish, but there were English translations to a lot of things. But yeah, I had a good time there. I definitely need to go back to Copenhagen at some point because I did not do enough there. We got the plane, it was 5 PM, we took off, and we landed back home. That is my Greenland/Denmark holiday experience. That is a good summary, I think. I've not had an experience like that ever before. Considering how difficult it is to go to Greenland and how expensive it all is, I don't think I'll be going back anytime soon. I would like to go back, but I don't think it'll be this decade, or even the next decade. That might be the only time I go in my life, which is kind of sad. Thank you all very much for watching this video. I don't know where I will be traveling next. It's not been decided. Hopefully I have more travel stories to tell you by next summer. Thank you everyone, and I'll see you all next one. Goodbye!